She thought it would be just another ordinary morning. Hoa Karen grabbed her purse, locked the front door, and started her short walk to the coffee shop on the corner. Same route. Same time. But there was always one thing she looked forward to, passing by the man who sat quietly on the bench near the bakery. He never begged. Never asked for anything. Just sat there, with his worn jacket and tired eyes, giving a small nod to anyone who acknowledged him. Hoa noticed him for the first time on a rainy day. While everyone rushed past, she paused. Something about his silence felt louder than words. That day, she bought him a coffee and a sandwich. He didn't say much, just smiled, nodded again, and said thank you. That was it. But the next day, she brought another meal. And the day after that. Before long, it became their unspoken routine. She never asked for his story. He never offered it. They just met, exchanged a few kind words, and went their separate ways. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. Years passed. Still, she never missed a morning. Hoa didn't think she was doing anything special. To her, it was just a sandwich and a warm cup of coffee. But to him, it was everything. Friends would ask her why she did it. "You don't even know him," they'd say. But Hoa would shrug and smile. "I don't need to," she'd reply. "He's human. That's enough." One morning, he wasn't there. The bench was empty. She looked around, unsure if he'd moved to another spot. She asked the bakery staff. No one had seen him. Days went by. Still no sign. She worried, wondered, even felt a bit lost without their small daily moment. Then, after nearly 2 weeks, he returned. He looked thinner, weaker, but his eyes lit up when he saw her. He reached into his jacket and handed her something, a small folded note, edges torn, handwriting barely legible. She unfolded it and read, "Thank you. You reminded me that I'm not invisible." She smiled, fighting back tears. She had no idea how much those small gestures meant. But it didn't end there. Years later, when Hoa got engaged, she shared her wedding plans with friends and family. She even mentioned them in passing to the quiet man on the bench. She didn't expect anything. Certainly not what would happen next. Because when the big day arrived, when the music played and the guests took their seats, 12 men walked in. Dressed in full Marine uniform. Straight posture. Silent steps. Heads held high. The crowd turned to look. Whispers filled the room. Nobody expected what came next. And the moment Hoa turned around, she froze. Her eyes widened. She blinked, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. 12 Marines. At her wedding. All looking straight at her. But why? What did they want? The answer started with a sandwich. Hoa Karen wasn't someone who chased attention. She didn't post about her good deeds or talk much about herself. To the people who knew her, she was kind, soft-spoken, and always willing to help. But behind her calm demeanor was a heart that never ignored someone in need. She grew up in a modest neighborhood. Her parents, immigrants who had seen their share of hardship, always reminded her that kindness was free, but powerful. Hoa took that to heart. As a child, she would share her lunch with classmates who forgot theirs. As an adult, that same spirit followed her everywhere. When she first noticed the man on the bench, it wasn't out of pity. It was something else. Something deeper. He didn't hold a sign. Didn't ask for money. Just sat quietly, every morning, in the same spot. People passed him without a second glance. But not Hoa. She saw him. And that made all the difference. She never pried. Never pushed for his story. Still, over time, little pieces came out. A "thank you" that hinted at loneliness. A joke that revealed an old sense of humor. And once, a quiet moment where he mentioned he had once worn a uniform. That stuck with her. A uniform. She didn't ask more, but she remembered. She began to notice other things. How he stood a little straighter than most. How he always said "ma'am" without thinking. How his boots, though worn, were carefully laced. She didn't need to hear the full story to understand what it meant. This man had served. And now, he had been forgotten. Still, Hoa showed up. Every morning, without fail. Sometimes she brought food. Other times, just a smile. That simple consistency built something stronger than either of them expected. Trust, respect, and something close to friendship. The man began to change. He shaved more often, started to speak more, even laughed occasionally. Not loudly, but enough to feel alive again. Hoa never made it about charity. To her, he wasn't the homeless man. He was someone who deserved dignity, someone worth showing up for. And then came the day she shared her engagement news. She had just gotten her dress. Her friends were buzzing with wedding plans. And as usual, during her morning stop, she casually mentioned the date. He smiled and said, "That's a lucky day." That was it. No questions. No hints of anything to come. But what Hoa didn't know, what she couldn't have imagined, was that her small act of kindness had echoed much further than that bench. Because the man she had been feeding, he wasn't alone. Not really. He had brothers. Not by blood, but by service. Other Marines who had served beside him. And when he told them about the woman who had fed him, listened to him, and never once judged him, they listened closely. And when they found out she was getting married, they decided it was time to show up. The man's name was Thomas. Hoa never asked, but one day, he simply offered it with a quiet smile. "Call me Tom," he said. It was the first time she felt like she really knew who he was. Tom had served over a decade in the Marines. 2 deployments overseas. Medals tucked away somewhere he couldn't remember. He had once been strong, disciplined, respected. But when he returned home, life hit hard. No family waiting. No job lined up. Years of structure vanished overnight. Like many veterans, he struggled in silence. The world moved on while he tried to keep up. Eventually, the streets became home. That bench, his routine. And for a long time, it seemed like no one noticed he was even there. Until Hoa. Her kindness wasn't loud or dramatic. She never treated him like a project. She just showed up. With food. With a smile. With presence. She didn't ask for anything. And maybe that's what made it so powerful. It reminded him that he still mattered. That he wasn't invisible. Tom began to feel like a person again. And when he told his old Marine buddies about Hoa, his words weren't just filled with gratitude, they were filled with admiration. "She saved me," he told them. "Not with money. Not with big promises. Just by showing up." These weren't just friends he talked to. They were Marines who had shared foxholes, long nights, and near-death moments with him. Men who knew what loyalty meant. And when they heard what Hoa had done, without asking for anything in return, they didn't forget it. One of them, a former sergeant named Marcus, made a few phone calls. Word spread. They talked, planned, and quietly agreed. If this woman could show up for someone who had nothing, then it was time someone showed up for her. And so they did. 12 Marines. Each one a veteran. Some had flown in from different states. Some hadn't worn their dress blues in years. But on that day, they stood shoulder to shoulder. Boots polished. Medals gleaming. Their presence, silent but powerful. No one at the wedding understood at first. Guests turned, confused, as the uniformed men filed in. Hoa's fiancé whispered, "Did you plan something?" She shook her head, eyes wide, unsure what was happening. Then, Tom stepped forward. Not in his usual jacket. Not with worn shoes. But in a suit that looked borrowed, a clean shave, and pride in his stance. He nodded at Hoa. "I told them about you," he said softly. "They wanted to meet the woman who never let me forget who I was." The room went still. Not a sound. Just a feeling, of respect, of surprise, of something sacred. Because in that moment, everyone understood. This wasn't about charity. It was about honor. About the kind of impact that never makes headlines but changes lives just the same. Tom's words hung in the air, quiet but powerful. Hoa didn't know what to say. She stood there, stunned, eyes locked on the man she had shared so many silent mornings with. He looked completely different, yet somehow exactly the same. Stronger now. Standing tall, not just physically, but in spirit. The 12 Marines behind him didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their presence said everything. Each one of them had their own story. Each one had worn the same uniform as Tom. And each one had come that day not out of obligation, but out of something deeper, respect. One by one, they approached Hoa. Some offered a handshake. Others gave her a gentle nod. One removed a small Marine Corps pin from his lapel and placed it in her hand. No words. Just a gesture. She didn't fully understand what it meant in that moment, but it made her hand shake. Tom explained. Each of those men had faced their own battles after service. Homelessness, addiction, loneliness. Some had slept in shelters. Others in cars. All of them had felt forgotten at one point. But they saw in Hoa something rare. Something many of them hadn't experienced in a long time. Genuine kindness without conditions. She reminded me I wasn't just a guy on a bench, Tom said quietly. She treated me like I still had value. And that changed everything. Hoa's eyes welled with tears. Not because she was sad, but because for the first time, she realized the weight of what she had done. She had never seen herself as a hero. Never thought her daily visits meant anything more than a bit of comfort. But now, standing in front of 12 men who had once served their country, she began to see her actions through their eyes. She had shown up when no one else did. And that didn't just help Tom, it reminded an entire brotherhood that humanity still existed, even in the smallest gestures. The guests at the wedding were speechless. Some cried quietly. Others just watched, hearts full. The ceremony hadn't even started, but it already felt like something unforgettable had taken place. There were no big speeches. No dramatic music. Just a room full of people realizing that real love and loyalty don't always come wrapped in grand gestures. Sometimes, they come in paper coffee cups. Tom reached into his coat and handed Hoa a small envelope. Inside was a letter, handwritten, with signatures from all 12 Marines. It thanked her for her compassion, for her consistency, for making one of their own feel seen again. Hoa folded the letter and held it to her heart. It was a moment that would stay with her forever. Not because of who showed up, but because it proved that even the quietest kindness can echo louder than anyone expects. As the ceremony finally began, there was a different kind of energy in the room. The music played softly, the bride walked slowly, but the crowd wasn't just watching a wedding, they were witnessing something far deeper. It wasn't about the flowers or the decorations anymore. Something had shifted. It was about people. About connection. About how one small choice can lead to something so much bigger. Hoa walked down the aisle with quiet grace. Her eyes were still red from holding back tears, but her smile was steady. The Marines had taken their seats near the front, sitting in perfect rows, as if they were still on duty. They weren't just guests anymore. They were part of something. Part of her story. And she was now part of theirs. As the vows were read, a few of the Marines glanced at each other, some with quiet nods, others with hands folded tightly in their laps. For them, this wasn't just a wedding, it was a reminder that honor still existed in the world. That loyalty, even outside of the battlefield, still had a place. Hoa's fiancé, Daniel, had watched it all unfold with quiet pride. He had known about Tom. Had even met him once or twice. But he didn't know the full story. Not like this. Now, standing beside the woman he was about to marry, he realized he wasn't just marrying someone kind. He was marrying someone who made people believe in good again. When the ceremony ended, there were no loud cheers. Just a deep silence, the kind that settles when everyone is trying to take in something beautiful. Hoa and Daniel walked back down the aisle, hand in hand, passing the rows of uniformed guests who rose to their feet in one synchronized motion. It was a gesture of respect, not for rank or status, but for heart. At the reception, things slowly returned to a more festive rhythm. People laughed, danced, toasted. But every once in a while, someone would look over at the table where the Marines sat and just watch. Not because they were heroes in uniform, but because they had shown what it meant to remember where you came from, and who helped you along the way. Tom didn't stay long at the party. He wasn't one for crowds. But before he left, he found Hoa once more. He didn't bring more words, only a simple sentence, "You gave me a reason to stand up again." Then he hugged her. A real hug. The kind you don't forget. The other Marines followed his lead. They gave her small thank yous, quiet smiles, respectful nods. And then, like they had arrived, they quietly disappeared into the night. But the weight of their visit stayed behind. People would talk about it for weeks. Not because it was dramatic or flashy, but because it was real. Unexpected. Deep. The kind of story that reminds you that kindness, even when unnoticed at first, always finds its way back. After the wedding, life slowly returned to normal. The flowers faded, the decorations were packed away, and the guests went home with stories they'd never forget. But something had changed in Hoa's world, and not just because she was now married. There was a quiet shift, something deeper. Something that stayed long after the music stopped. People who had attended the wedding couldn't stop talking about what they saw. Not just the ceremony, but the moment those Marines walked in. Neighbors mentioned it in passing. Strangers reached out after hearing the story. Friends told friends, who told others. It spread, not like gossip, but like something people needed to hear, something that made them feel hopeful. Hoa never sought attention. She didn't post about it on social media. She didn't give interviews. But the story grew anyway, passed from person to person, not because it was dramatic, but because it was human. What started as one small act, giving a sandwich to someone who looked hungry, had become something much bigger than she ever imagined. Tom no longer sat on that bench every day. He had found help. One of the Marines had connected him with a veterans outreach program. He got a room, a bed, a fresh start. It wasn't easy for him. Starting over never is. But this time, he had something he didn't have before, a reason. And that reason came in the form of a woman who reminded him he still mattered. Hoa kept going with her life, but she never forgot. She started noticing more people. Not just those in need, but those who felt overlooked. A tired cashier. A lonely neighbor. An elderly man at the park. It was like her heart had grown even more open, like Tom's story had unlocked a door that couldn't be closed again. Sometimes, she'd get letters. Not from reporters, but from veterans. From families. From people she'd never met. They wrote to say thank you. To tell her they'd heard what she did. That it gave them hope. That it reminded them good still existed in the world. And she read every single one. What she realized, over time, was something she hadn't understood before. Kindness isn't always about grand gestures. It doesn't need a spotlight. It just needs consistency. It needs someone willing to show up, quietly, again and again, even when no one is watching. Because that's what makes the biggest difference. A meal handed over without judgment. A smile shared with someone who feels invisible. A wedding that turned into a moment of healing for people who had nearly forgotten what dignity felt like. Hoa never asked for anything in return. But somehow, the world found a way to give it back to her anyway, in respect, in gratitude, and in a moment that no one there would ever forget. And it all began with something simple. A quiet decision. One woman. One act. And a bench no one else noticed. There's something powerful about the way small actions ripple through time. Hoa never expected that feeding one man would lead to so many lives being touched. She never kept count of how many meals she handed over, or how many mornings she paused to ask, "How are you today?" It was just what she did, without second thought, without seeking thanks. But the ripple kept going. Months after the wedding, Hoa was walking through the same neighborhood where it had all started. She passed the bakery. The bench was empty now, but it didn't make her sad. In fact, it made her smile. Tom had moved on, found stability, taken steps forward. The empty bench wasn't a symbol of loss. It was a reminder that people can get back up, given the chance. That same day, she saw someone else sitting alone. Not Tom, not a Marine, just a man holding a worn backpack, looking tired and out of place. Hoa didn't hesitate. She walked into the bakery, bought an extra sandwich, and brought it over to him. "Hey," she said gently, "you hungry?" He looked surprised, almost unsure how to respond. But he took the sandwich. He thanked her. She nodded and kept walking. Nothing more. No story needed. Just a moment. But it was one she knew could lead somewhere. Because now, Hoa understood something she hadn't fully realized before. People don't always need to be rescued, they just need to be remembered. Not fixed. Not pitied. Just seen. She began volunteering quietly, helping at a local shelter once a week. Not because she was trying to become a different person, but because her heart was now tuned differently. Her eyes saw more. Her ears listened closer. Even strangers at the grocery store seemed less like background noise and more like people with stories worth knowing. Back at home, she kept the envelope from her wedding in a small drawer. The one with the letter from the Marines. On hard days, she'd open it and read it again. Not to feel proud, but to feel grounded. It reminded her that nothing we do with love ever disappears. It stays. In someone's heart. In someone's memory. In someone's second chance. Tom would call her from time to time. Not often, just enough to check in. He'd update her on his progress, his job search, his tiny apartment. One time, he told her he'd started helping another vet who had fallen on hard times. He said, "I just did what you did for me." Hoa didn't say much. She just smiled. And just like that, the ripple spread a little further. Every person has the power to change the course of another's life. Not with speeches. Not with big moments. But with care. With presence. With a sandwich offered on a rainy morning. And a heart that refuses to walk past someone who's been forgotten.